Well, here's a fun little inequality. Solve this inequality. Before I do, I noticed that this could actually equal 0, and I'm just talking about the denominator. If x equals a 1, that would cause 1 minus 1 equals 0, so that would make it undefined. Also, if x equals a negative 1, that would also cause it to be undefined. So I'm not for sure that that's going to be a part of the answer, but I'm just noticing that before I start doing algebra. Okay, so what you could do is cross multiply. So when you cross multiply, we would have a 1 times x to the 4th plus 1 is less than, and then cross multiply in this direction, and x squared gets multiplied with x squared minus 1. Now, one other thing to keep in mind when you multiply both sides of an inequality, the inequality will stay the same if you're multiplying by a positive. So if you multiply by a positive, then the inequality stays the same. If you're multiplying by a negative, then the inequality has to change directions. So I might have to consider two cases. Here, if I multiply by a positive, then the inequality stays the same. And then I get x to the 4th plus 1 less than, over here, distribute. There's going to be x to the 4th minus x squared. And then I could subtract x to the 4th. Now, subtracting or adding does not ever change the inequality. It's only multiplying or dividing by a negative that will change the inequality. So I've got 1 is less than negative x squared. And then I could add x squared to both sides, changing it to a positive x squared on the left side. And then it says, when is x squared plus 1 less than 0? Or in other words, when is it negative? Well, an x squared itself can never be negative. A plus 1 can never be negative. So that means that this has no solution. So I think that the idea of multiplying by a positive, gives us no solution. So next we're going to have to consider when it's negative. Also, I could graph the original and see what's going on. So if I go to the graphing calculator and go to y equals, you put them as two separate functions. So this was the left side of the inequality. That's going to be the red one. And the question is saying, when is the red one less than or below the bluish purple color? So if you look at the graph, when is the red one below the blue one? So that's this region right here, that it's below the blue one. And that happens to be between the positive and negative 1 if you look on the x-axis right there. Okay, so there is a solution, but it didn't come from the first part that I did. I then have to say, what about if it was negative? Well, basically I don't have to redo the whole thing, because I know that this is positive. I know that this is positive. The only thing that could be negative is the x squared minus 1. So I don't have to redo the whole thing. I can just say, so the second case is, when is x squared minus 1? So just going back to that right there is the only thing that could make it negative. When is that less than 0? And then you could even factor the left side. That would be factored as x plus 1 times x minus 1. And for the moment, I'm just going to say, what if it equals 0? So I could solve for x. And then this factor, when you set it equal to 0, will give us the answer negative 1. And this one will give us the answer positive 1. And as I saw in the graph, it's when the x values are between the negative 1 and the positive 1, that's when the red one is below the blue one. So the final answer is when x is in this interval from -1 to +1. And this needs to have the round parentheses, because if you actually did have x equals 1 in this one, that's what I was saying at the very beginning of this video, that would make division by 0, so that's not possible. So the final answer is between -1 and +1.